On a sweltering morning, June 17, 1943, under the relentless sun of New Guinea, Master Sergeant Thomas Miller wiped sweat from his brow, peering intently at a B-25 Mitchell bomber. The aircraft, baking on the Marilyn airfield, represented the Allies' best hope against the relentless Japanese supply lines, yet Miller saw only untapped potential, a sleeping giant shackled by conventional thinking. Conventional wisdom dictated that bombers dropped bombs, and strafers were dedicated fighter aircraft. This notion was about to be obliterated by a man who saw no limits to what could be achieved with enough ingenuity and a .50 caliber machine gun. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the tale of how one mechanic's vision transformed the B-25 into a terrifying 14-gun flying fortress of destruction, forever changing the face of Pacific air warfare. Master Sergeant Thomas Miller was not a man of grand speeches or intricate theories. He was a hands-on genius, a self-taught engineer whose hands were always grimy with grease and his mind buzzing with possibilities. Before the war, he'd run a successful garage in rural Iowa, known for coaxing impossible performance from farm machinery and hot rods alike. When Pearl Harbor struck, Miller, like millions of others, traded his wrench for military service, finding himself assigned to the 345th Bomb Group, a unit struggling to stem the tide of Japanese logistics in the vast, unforgiving Pacific theater. Their B-25s, while formidable, were primarily designed for medium-altitude bombing, a tactic proving increasingly ineffective against nimble Japanese convoy ships and their anti-aircraft defenses. Bombs often missed, and the standard nose-mounted machine guns, usually two .50 caliber weapons, offered only a fleeting suppressive fire during strafing runs. Miller watched mission after mission return with frustrated crews and minimal results, a knot of dissatisfaction tightening in his gut. He spent his nights sketching, poring over aircraft schematics, and talking to returning pilots. Captain Ben Carter, a seasoned pilot known for his daring low-level attacks, often voiced his frustrations to Miller. "Tom," Carter would sigh, leaning against a wing after a particularly fruitless mission, "we fly in at mast height, practically touching the water, but by the time we've sprayed a few rounds, we're past the target. We need more lead in the air, a wall of steel, not just a handful of bullets." Miller listened, his mind already spinning. He understood the problem. Standard bomb runs required precision that was hard to achieve at low altitude and high speed against moving targets. High-altitude bombing was safer, but even less accurate. What was needed was a way to deliver overwhelming firepower in a short, devastating burst, turning the B-25 from a bomb delivery platform into a flying shotgun. His initial concept was radical. Replace the entire glazed nose section of the B-25 with a solid metal fairing, bristling with fixed forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. This would convert the bombardier's position into a gunner's nest of unprecedented power. The idea was audacious, bordering on insane, to the conventional military minds of the day. A bomber, armed like a fighter, but with the payload capacity of a twin-engine medium bomber. The sheer weight of the guns, their ammunition, and the necessary structural reinforcement would challenge the aircraft's stability and performance. Recoil alone was a significant concern. 8 .50 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously would exert enormous stress on the airframe. Miller meticulously calculated, recalculated, and then calculated again. He sketched out solutions for ammunition feed, spent casing ejection, and weapon cooling. He envisioned not just adding guns, but integrating them into a coherent, devastating system. The skepticism was immediate and widespread. When he first presented his rough sketches to Colonel Harding, the group commander, the response was a polite but firm dismissal. "Sergeant Miller," Harding had said, tapping a pencil against the schematics, "we appreciate your initiative, but a B-25 is a bomber. We don't convert them into gunships. It would compromise its primary mission and stability. Where would you even find the parts, let alone the authorization for such a radical modification?" But Miller was unyielding. He believed deeply in his vision, seeing beyond the logistical hurdles to the potential for saving lives and winning battles. He knew that the desperate situation in the Pacific, with its endless convoys and hardened Japanese defenses, demanded unconventional solutions. He knew he had to build a prototype to prove his theory, even if it meant working in secret, scrounging for every last bolt and bullet. He knew that if he could just get one aircraft into the air with his modifications, the results would speak for themselves. The future of anti-shipping warfare in the Pacific was about to be irrevocably altered, one .50 caliber round at a time. Undeterred by the initial skepticism, Master Sergeant Miller dedicated himself to bringing his audacious vision to life. He knew that obtaining official approval would be nearly impossible without a tangible proof of concept. His first ally was Sergeant David Jenkins, a quiet, methodical crew chief who had a knack for finding parts others declared impossible to locate. Jenkins, initially bewildered by Miller's plans to turn a bomber into a flying arsenal, quickly became a convert after Miller patiently explained the deficiencies of current anti-shipping tactics. "Think of it, Dave," Miller had explained, tracing lines on a greasy napkin. 8 guns in the nose, all firing forward. That's a solid stream of armor-piercing incendiary rounds, enough to shred anything that floats. Jenkins, who had seen too many ships escape with minor damage, nodded slowly, his eyes lighting up with the possibilities. Their clandestine work began in earnest. Miller and Jenkins scavenged the airfield for decommissioned aircraft, spare parts, and anything that could be repurposed. They needed 8 .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, the backbone of American air power, a formidable task in itself given the constant demand for such weapons. Jenkins managed to acquire them piece by piece, some from wrecked planes, others borrowed from ordnance supply points with a wink and a nod from sympathetic quartermasters who admired Miller's grit. The core of the modification involved replacing the B-25C's transparent bombardier's nose with a solid armored metal cone. Miller meticulously designed a framework to house the 8 machine guns, ensuring they were precisely aligned for maximum impact. This required custom fabricated mounting plates and recoil buffers to absorb the immense stresses of simultaneous firing. Weight balance was a critical concern. Adding 8 heavy machine guns, along with their ammunition, would drastically shift the aircraft's center of gravity. Miller spent countless hours calculating the exact placement of each component, even considering moving other internal systems to compensate. He sketched out plans for reinforced fuselage sections to handle the additional weight and recoil. Ammunition feed systems were another engineering puzzle. Each .50 caliber gun required a continuous belt of ammunition, and Miller designed an intricate system of chutes and canisters that could hold thousands of rounds, allowing for sustained firing without reloading during a mission. He estimated each nose gun alone would carry approximately 400 rounds, far exceeding the typical capacity for fixed forward-firing guns on a bomber. But Miller wasn't content with just 8 guns in the nose. His vision extended further. He believed in overwhelming firepower. He proposed adding 2 more fixed forward-firing .50 caliber guns in fuselage blisters, one on each side, just behind the cockpit. These would be angled slightly downwards, increasing the cone of fire. This brought the total forward-firing complement to a staggering 10 guns. And still, he wasn't finished. He looked at the existing belly gun position, traditionally a single flexible 50 Carlos. Why not make it fixed forward-firing and add another alongside it? This would bring the total to 12 dedicated forward-firing guns. Coupled with the 2 flexible guns in the dorsal turret for defensive purposes, the B-25 would carry an unprecedented 14 .50 caliber machine guns. It was an arsenal on wings. The sheer audacity of the plan meant secrecy was paramount. They worked mostly at night under dim utility lights, transforming a battered B-25C that had been grounded for engine repairs into Miller's monstrous creation. Jenkins, with his meticulous nature, handled the wiring for the firing circuits, ensuring all guns could be fired simultaneously or in selectable groups. Miller, meanwhile, supervised the structural modifications, welding new plates, reinforcing spars, and ensuring every bolt was torqued to perfection. He even devised a system for jettisoning spent casings externally to prevent them from piling up inside the fuselage. Every day, as dawn approached, they would cover their work with tarpaulins, making the aircraft appear as just another bomber awaiting repairs. The project was slow, painstaking, and fraught with challenges, But the vision of those Japanese convoys being torn to pieces fueled their tireless efforts. The air over New Guinea was thick with humidity and anticipation, and soon a new kind of predator would join the hunt. Months of clandestine work, fueled by determination and endless cups of lukewarm coffee, finally began to yield results. By late August 1943, the skeleton of Master Sergeant Miller's modified B-25C, designated Spirit of Iowa by the small team, was taking on a fearsome new shape. The transparent bombardier's nose, once a symbol of precision bombing, had been replaced by a sleek, unyielding metal fairing resembling the snout of a predatory beast. Within this nose, 8 50-caliber machine guns were nestled in a precisely engineered matrix, their muzzles staring forward like hungry eyes. The twin fuselage blisters, each housing an additional 50 cal, completed the forward-firing array, bringing the total to 10. 2 more fixed forward-firing guns were mounted in the belly, just beneath the cockpit, creating a truly devastating concentration of firepower. The installation of the guns themselves was a marvel of field engineering. Each weapon was secured with heavy-duty mounts designed to withstand the tremendous recoil forces. Miller personally oversaw the alignment, using custom jigs to ensure every barrel pointed precisely where it should, converging at a predetermined range to maximize impact on target. The electrical wiring for the firing solenoids was meticulously laid, ensuring instant and simultaneous discharge. Sergeant Jenkins, ever the pragmatist, devised an ingenious system of ammunition belts and feed chutes that snaked from large capacity boxes deeper within the fuselage to each gun, promising a sustained deluge of fire. The Spirit of Iowa was no longer just a bomber. It was a testament to Miller's unwavering belief in overwhelming force. The transformation was not without its costs. The sheer weight of the additional guns, ammunition, and structural reinforcement pushed the B-25 to its operational limits. Miller had painstakingly calculated the new center of gravity, making minor adjustments to internal components to maintain stability. Fuel consumption was projected to increase due to the added drag and weight, potentially reducing range. Yet, these compromises were deemed acceptable in exchange for the promised increase in offensive power. The men working on the project, a small hand-picked crew sworn to secrecy, began to refer to the aircraft as Miller's Monster, a term of both respect and slight apprehension. Its potential was clear, but its actual performance remained an unknown variable. Finally, the day came for ground tests. With no official authorization for such a radical modification, Miller and Jenkins had to be discreet. They taxied the Spirit of Iowa to a remote corner of the airfield, away from prying eyes. Miller himself took the pilot's seat, alongside a skeptical Captain Ben Carter, who had been convinced to participate out of a mix of curiosity and respect for Miller's tenacity. Carter, having flown conventional B-25s on countless anti-shipping runs, was still wary. "Are you sure this thing won't shake itself apart, Tom?" he asked, gripping the controls. Miller just grinned, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Only one way to find out, Captain." With a nod from Miller, Carter hit the master arm switch. The roar of the engines, usually the dominant sound, was about to be eclipsed. "Ready, Tom?" Carter asked, his voice tight. "Ready as she'll ever be," Miller replied. Carter pressed the firing button. The air vibrated with a deafening continuous roar as all 12 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns discharged simultaneously. The ground shuddered. Streams of tracers ripped into the distant jungle, cutting a swath through the foliage. The sound was unlike anything anyone had ever heard from a B-25, a continuous, terrifying thrum of lead being hurled into the atmosphere. The recoil was tremendous, rocking the aircraft violently, but the reinforced structure held. Spent casings cascaded onto the tarmac, forming glittering piles of brass. When the firing ceased, an eerie silence descended, broken only by the distant calls of jungle birds. Carter, his ears ringing, looked at Miller, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Good Lord, Tom," he breathed. That's incredible. It's a flying shotgun." The test had been a resounding success. The structural integrity held, the firing mechanism worked flawlessly, and the sheer volume of fire was astonishing. The ground crew, initially watching from a distance with trepidation, now approached with awe, their doubts turning into excitement. The Spirit of Iowa was no longer just a concept, it was a potent reality. Now, Miller faced the daunting task of convincing Colonel Harding and higher command that this experimental unauthorized weapon was ready for the ultimate trial. Combat. News of the successful ground-firing test of Miller's monster spread like wildfire through the base, despite Miller and Jenkins' attempts at discretion. Colonel Harding, initially skeptical, could no longer ignore the growing buzz. He summoned Miller and Captain Carter to his office, his expression a mixture of irritation and grudging curiosity. "Sergeant Miller," Harding began, "I understand you've converted a medium bomber into something resembling a ground attack fighter, all without official sanction. Do you have any idea the regulations you've circumvented?" Miller stood firm. "Sir, with all due respect, our current tactics aren't sinking enough Japanese ships. This aircraft has the potential to change that. Captain Carter here can attest to its firepower." Carter, still buzzing from the experience, chimed in. "Colonel, the sheer volume of fire from those 12 guns is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's truly revolutionary." Harding, a pragmatist at heart, knew that desperate times called for desperate measures. He eventually conceded to allow flight tests, but under stringent conditions and with his direct oversight. A series of rigorous flight trials commenced over the next few weeks. Captain Carter, with Miller often riding as an observer in the navigator's seat, put the Spirit of Iowa through its paces. They tested its handling characteristics with the added weight and changed center of gravity. While slightly less nimble than a standard B-25, the aircraft remained stable and controllable. The real test came during air-to-ground gunnery runs against derelict Japanese barges anchored offshore. Miller and Carter worked tirelessly, refining the aircraft's performance. Miller adjusted gun convergence points, experimented with ammunition types, and fine-tuned the firing mechanisms. Carter, in turn, adapted his flying style, learning to manage the recoil, which still significantly buffeted the aircraft during sustained bursts. He discovered that short, controlled bursts were effective, but that a continuous 2 to 3 second stream of fire was truly devastating. During one test, a derelict barge, previously considered a tough target, was literally torn apart by a single pass from the Spirit of Iowa. The 50 caliber rounds, a mix of armor-piercing and incendiary, shredded its superstructure, punched through its hull, and ignited fuel drums with terrifying efficiency. The water around the barge erupted in geysers of spray and debris. Witnessing the devastation firsthand, Colonel Harding became a believer. "Sergeant Miller," he announced after watching the barge disintegrate, "you've built yourself a monster, but a damn effective one. We're going to need more of these." Official authorization for field modifications was granted, albeit with a strict directive for Miller to train other mechanics in his methods. The news of the Spirit of Iowa's performance spread rapidly through the squadrons, generating a mix of excitement and anticipation among the pilots. The frustration of fruitless missions began to give way to a new sense of purpose. Word also reached other units in the Pacific, hinting at a new, devastating weapon being forged in the crucible of New Guinea. The potential impact on Japanese shipping, which was already facing increasing pressure, was immense. The B-25, once a respectable but conventional medium bomber, was about to be reborn as a specialized anti-shipping platform capable of delivering a staggering hail of lead. Miller, though proud, remained focused. He knew that the ultimate test was yet to come, real combat against a live, armed Japanese convoy. His innovation was no longer a secret, but a burgeoning weapon system ready to be unleashed. The stage was set for the Spirit of Iowa and its crew to prove their worth in the deadly arena of the Pacific skies. The dawn of October 26, 1943, brought with it a palpable tension. 4 B-25s, including the Spirit of Iowa, rumbled on the Maryland airstrip, their engines coughing to life in the pre-dawn gloom. This was the first combat mission for Miller's modified aircraft. An anti-shipping strike against a small Japanese convoy reported moving through the Bismarck Sea. Captain Ben Carter, at the controls of the Spirit of Iowa, felt a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. Master Sergeant Miller, despite strict regulations, had managed to secure permission to fly as an observer in the navigator's seat of the lead aircraft, ensuring his creation would be properly wielded. Miles away on the bridge of the Japanese transport ship Kurei Maru, Captain Kenjiro Tanaka sipped his green tea, his brow furrowed with familiar anxiety. Convoy duty in the Bismarck Sea was a daily gamble against Allied air power, but today felt different. Reports spoke of increasingly aggressive American patrols. His cargo of vital ammunition and fuel for Rabaul was precious, and the thought of losing it gnawed at him. He trusted his gun crews, but the Pacific War was turning into a meat grinder for Japanese shipping. He glanced at the calm, steely expanse of the sea, unaware of the new, terrible predator about to descend from the skies. The B-25s approached their target at wave-top height, using the cover of the morning haze and the low radar horizon to remain undetected. The thrum of their engines was masked by the vast ocean until they were almost upon the convoy. Suddenly, the Japanese lookout screamed, "Enemy aircraft! Dead ahead! Low!" Alarms blared across the Kurei Maru as Tanaka ordered evasive maneuvers and his anti-aircraft guns opened fire, sending puffs of black smoke into the sky. But these were no ordinary B-25s. Carter, leading the formation, lined up the Spirit of Iowa on the largest transport. He flicked the master arm switch. "Guns armed, Tom," he announced over the intercom. Miller, peering through a small observation port, saw the target looming, a dark silhouette against the brightening horizon. Carter squeezed the trigger. The world erupted. The 12 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns on the Spirit of Iowa unleashed a torrent of fire unlike anything the Japanese gunners had ever witnessed. It wasn't sporadic bursts. It was a continuous, concentrated stream of glowing tracers, a solid wall of incandescent projectiles ripping through the air. The sound was a horrifying, sustained roar even inside the cockpit. On the Kurei Maru, Captain Tanaka watched in stunned disbelief as his ship was utterly savaged. The tracers converged on the transport, tearing through its bridge, perforating the hull, and igniting fuel lines. The ship's thin armor was no match for the relentless assault. Explosions ripped through the cargo holds as ammunition detonated. Men on deck were scythed down by the merciless hail of bullets. The Spirit of Iowa banked sharply after its pass, making way for the other B-25s, which also delivered devastating strafing runs, though with fewer guns. In mere seconds, the Kurei Maru was a blazing inferno, listing heavily. The other transport ships in the convoy fared little better. The overwhelming firepower of the lead B-25 had effectively broken the convoy's defense, allowing the others to finish the job. Within minutes, 2 transports were sinking, one was burning fiercely, and the escorting destroyer was reeling from multiple hits, its anti-aircraft fire silenced. Back in the cockpit, the acrid smell of gunpowder permeated the air. Carter's hands were shaking slightly, but his eyes shone with a wild triumph. "My God, Tom," he gasped, "it just tore them apart like paper." Miller, a rare smile on his face, nodded. "That, Captain, is the sound of 12 50 calibers working in unison." The pilots on the return flight were euphoric. The Spirit of Iowa had proven its worth beyond all expectations. The devastating success of the mission sent shockwaves through both Allied and Japanese high commands. A new, terrifying chapter in the Pacific Air War had just begun. The first combat mission of the Spirit of Iowa marked a decisive turning point. Reports of the convoy's destruction, coupled with astonishing pilot debriefs from Captain Carter and his squadron, quickly reached the highest echelons of Allied command. The efficacy of Miller's 14-gun modification was undeniable. Over the following weeks, the Spirit of Iowa and other B-25s, hastily converted under Miller's supervision, embarked on a relentless campaign against Japanese shipping. The results were consistently devastating. Japanese convoys, once able to rely on a certain degree of resilience, were now being annihilated with terrifying speed and efficiency. For the Allied pilots, the new strafers instilled a profound sense of confidence. Captain Carter, now a staunch evangelist for Miller's modifications, described the feeling of an attack run as flying a hurricane of lead. The ability to unleash thousands of rounds per minute on a target meant that even a brief low-level pass was enough to inflict catastrophic damage. Pilots no longer aimed for precise weak points. They aimed to saturate the entire target with a continuous stream of armor-piercing and incendiary projectiles. The sheer volume of fire tore through bridge structures, severed steering cables, ignited fuel and detonated ammunition, leaving little chance of survival for the ships or their crews. The tactics evolved, with aircraft flying in single file, each strafing a different section of the target ship, creating a crisscrossing pattern of destruction. On the Japanese side, the psychological impact was profound and terrifying. News of the demon bombers with their impossible firepower spread like wildfire among the naval crews. Captain Kenjiro Tanaka, having narrowly survived the attack on the Kure Maru, was transferred to an escort destroyer, only to witness more horrors. He reported to his superiors that the American bombers were no longer merely dropping bombs. They were vomiting steel, turning ships into burning wrecks in seconds. Morale plummeted among convoy crews, who felt increasingly helpless against these new predators. Sailors spoke of the B-25's approach not as an air raid, but as an inescapable curtain of fire. The distinctive, prolonged roar of the 12 to 14 50 caliber machine guns became synonymous with impending doom. Japanese countermeasures, primarily increased anti-aircraft fire and tighter convoy formations, proved largely ineffective against the low-level, high-speed strafing attacks. The concentration of firepower allowed the B-25s to suppress defenses almost instantly, shredding gun emplacements and crew before they could effectively respond. Losses of Japanese transport ships escalated dramatically, crippling their ability to resupply their isolated garrisons across the Pacific. Vital war materials, from fuel to rice, were being sent to the bottom of the sea at an unprecedented rate. The 345th Bomb Group, now nicknamed the Air Apaches for their aggressive low-level tactics, became legendary, their planes recognizable by their distinctive solid noses and the fearsome array of gun muzzles. Master Sergeant Miller, though still largely preferring to remain in the hangars, found himself a celebrated figure. His genius had transcended the mechanical. It had fundamentally altered the tactical landscape of the Pacific War. He received commendations, and engineers from other units, even other branches, came to study his modifications. His work was no longer a clandestine project, but a critical, authorized, and rapidly expanding program. He still personally oversaw the conversion of every new B-25, ensuring the quality and precision of each installation. The demand for these strafer B-25s skyrocketed, and Miller found himself leading a small army of mechanics, all dedicated to transforming more bombers into these terrifying instruments of destruction. The war in the Pacific, already a brutal grinder, had just acquired a new, more horrifying dimension for the Japanese. The legend of the 14-gun B-25 was truly being etched in blood and fire. The devastating success of the initial 14-gun B-25s led to a rapid and widespread adoption of Master Sergeant Miller's modifications across multiple squadrons in the Pacific. What began as a clandestine project by a lone mechanic soon became a crucial, officially sanctioned program. Workshops across New Guinea and the Solomon Islands buzzed with activity as mechanics, now trained by Miller and his most trusted assistants like Sergeant Jenkins, worked tirelessly to convert standard B-25s into the formidable strafing variants. The demand was immense, driven by the ever-increasing need to choke off Japanese supply lines. The standard B-25, which typically carried a maximum of 9 or 10 50 caliber guns, 2 fixed forward, 2 flexible in the nose, 2 dorsal, 2 waist, 1 tail, was systematically transformed. The glazed bombardier's nose was replaced with a solid nose containing 8 fixed forward-firing 50s. 2 more fixed guns were added in blister packs on the sides of the fuselage just aft of the cockpit. For some later models, the belly turret was replaced with 2 fixed forward-firing guns, bringing the total to an incredible 14 forward-firing machine guns. Each of these weapons was fed by ammunition belts holding hundreds of rounds, providing a sustained torrent of lead for several seconds of continuous fire. The total ammunition capacity for the forward-firing guns alone could exceed 5,000 rounds. These heavily armed B-25s, often painted in aggressive shark-mouth camouflage, became the bane of Japanese shipping. Squadron commanders eagerly adopted the skip bombing, and mast-height attack tactics that maximized the strafer's effectiveness. Pilots would approach convoys at extremely low altitudes, sometimes just 50 feet above the waves, then unleash their devastating firepower before pulling up sharply. The speed of the attack, combined with the overwhelming firepower, left Japanese anti-aircraft gunners little time to react. The sight of these B-25s, with their solid noses and numerous gun muzzles, striking terror into the hearts of Japanese sailors, became a common occurrence. Reports from Japanese intelligence painted a grim picture for Imperial High Command. Losses of merchant vessels in key areas like the Bismarck Sea and around New Guinea skyrocketed. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, though focused on larger fleet engagements, received numerous distressing reports about the new American flying artillery. He understood the strategic threat these aircraft posed to their dwindling logistical capacity. Japanese troops on isolated islands found themselves increasingly cut off, their supplies dwindling, their morale eroding. The strafing B-25s were not just sinking ships, they were systematically strangling the Japanese war effort in the Pacific. Anecdotes from pilots and ground crews abounded. Captain Carter, now leading his own flight of strafers, once recounted how a single pass from his B-25 reduced a small freighter to a burning hulk in less than 10 seconds. Ground crews spoke of the aircraft returning with countless bullet holes, sometimes even riddled with small arms fire, but always having delivered their devastating payload of lead. The planes were tough and the pilots were braver still, pushing their machines to the limits. Miller, still overseeing the conversions, had become a legend in his own right, admired by pilots and mechanics alike for his relentless pursuit of practical battlefield-winning innovation. The roar of a formation of 14-gun B-25s taking off was no longer just engine noise. It was the sound of a new terrifying chapter in the war, one written in steel and fire, destined to turn the tide against an increasingly desperate enemy. By late 1944, the impact of Master Sergeant Miller's modified B-25s was undeniable and profound. The relentless campaign waged by the 14-gun strafers had crippled Japanese shipping throughout the Pacific. Entire convoys, once vital lifelines to garrisons scattered across countless islands, were now routinely wiped out. The previously resilient Japanese merchant fleet, already stretched thin by wartime demands, was hemorrhaging vessels at an unsustainable rate. Japanese commanders on islands like Rabaul and Bougainville found their supplies of food, ammunition, and reinforcements severely curtailed, turning once formidable strongholds into isolated, starving outposts. The tactical innovations spurred by the strafer B-25s cemented their legacy. Pilots developed highly aggressive, low-altitude attack profiles, often approaching their targets head-on or from the beam, raking ships with overwhelming fire from bow to stern. They learned to coordinate their attacks with pinpoint precision, with multiple aircraft targeting different parts of a single vessel, maximizing damage in a matter of seconds. The psychological impact on the Japanese military was immense. The sight of the shark-mouthed, solid-nosed B-25s spitting fire from an impossible array of guns instilled a deep, demoralizing terror. Japanese sailors and troops on transport ships had little chance of survival once a strafer bore down on them. The distinct, thunderous roar of the 14.50 caliber machine guns became the sound of death approaching. Master Sergeant Miller, while still maintaining his humble demeanor, had become a quiet hero. His modifications were not just an engineering marvel, they were a strategic weapon that significantly contributed to the Allied island-hopping campaign. By cutting off supplies, the strafers softened up Japanese defenses, making subsequent ground invasions less costly in terms of Allied lives. The relentless attacks helped pave the way for major engagements like the Leyte Gulf campaign, where the Japanese Navy, already starved of fuel and resources due to the convoy losses, faced an increasingly confident and well-supplied Allied force. Miller's genius had turned a medium bomber into the ultimate anti-shipping platform, shifting the balance of power in the air and at sea. Yet, the success came at a cost. The strain of constant innovation, improvisation, and the sheer scale of the modification program took its toll on Miller. His hair had thinned and his face was etched with fatigue, but his resolve never wavered. He oversaw the training of hundreds of mechanics, ensuring that his precise methods were replicated faithfully across the Pacific. Captain Ben Carter, having flown countless missions in his beloved strafer, witnessed firsthand the brutal efficiency of the weapon Miller had created. He saw the terror in the eyes of the enemy and the growing confidence in his own squadron mates. The strafers, while bringing death to the enemy, also brought a sense of hope and efficacy to the Allied air crews. The statistics were staggering. By the end of the war, the 14-gun B-25s, particularly those of the 5th Air Force, were credited with sinking an enormous percentage of Japanese merchant shipping in the Southwest Pacific. Their operational tempo and success rate were unmatched. They proved that concentrated, overwhelming firepower delivered at low altitude could be far more effective against shipping than conventional high-altitude bombing. The B-25, originally designed for one role, had been completely redefined by the ingenuity of one man and the desperate needs of war. The war in the Pacific was irrevocably turning, and Miller's monsters were leading the charge, tearing apart the logistical backbone of the Japanese Empire, one convoy at a time. The battle was far from over, but the path to victory was becoming clearer, paved by the relentless stream of 50-caliber bullets. As the war in the Pacific drew to a close in August 1945, the role of Master Sergeant Thomas Miller's 14-gun B-25 strafers in accelerating the Allied victory was indisputable. Their relentless destruction of Japanese shipping had systematically starved isolated garrisons, crippled industrial output, and severely hampered the Japanese military's ability to wage war. The psychological impact on both sides had been profound. Terror for the Japanese and a fierce confidence for the Allied air crews who wielded these flying arsenals. The era of the heavily armed gunship, born out of a mechanic's ingenuity, had left an indelible mark on air warfare. Master Sergeant Miller, the quiet genius, saw his monstrous creations return from their final missions. After the war, he eschewed any public acclaim, choosing to return to his small garage in Iowa. He rebuilt cars, fixed tractors, and lived a life of quiet dignity, his hands still skilled, but now free from the urgent demands of war. He never spoke much of his wartime innovations, the memories of destruction tempered by the knowledge that his work had saved countless Allied lives. Captain Ben Carter, having survived the war, continued his flying career in the newly formed United States Air Force, forever advocating for specialized ground attack aircraft. He carried with him the visceral memory of those terrifying, triumphant strafing runs, a testament to the power of a concentrated wall of lead. The impact of Miller's modifications on air warfare tactics was immense and long-lasting. The B-25 strafers demonstrated the overwhelming effectiveness of massed forward-firing machine guns against ground and sea targets. This concept of turning bombers into dedicated gunships directly influenced the development of post-war attack aircraft. The lessons learned from the B-25's transformation informed the design of subsequent close air support platforms, highlighting the need for robust airframes and concentrated firepower for low-altitude assaults. The idea of skip bombing and mast-height attacks, perfected by the strafer crews, became standard doctrine for anti-shipping operations for decades, showing that precision at low altitude could be achieved through sheer volume of fire. The legacy of the 14-gun B-25 was more than just a footnote in aviation history. It was a testament to the power of innovation born from necessity and the profound impact a single individual's genius can have on the course of global conflict. It highlighted how industrial adaptation, even at the field level, could revolutionize combat. The planes themselves, though eventually retired and scrapped, left behind a powerful story of transformation. A medium bomber reimagined as a terrifying instrument of destruction, capable of changing the tide of battle with a single sustained burst of fire. The image of those solid-nosed B-25s, spitting 14 streams of tracers into a desperate Japanese convoy, remains one of the most iconic and terrifying images of the Pacific War, a visceral symbol of overwhelming firepower. The Japanese, whose convoys had suffered such grievous losses, learned a hard lesson about the devastating efficacy of low-level strafing. For the Allies, it was a confirmation that daring innovation, coupled with the bravery of aircrews, could overcome even the most formidable defenses. The roar of those 14 guns, once a sound of fear for the enemy, now echoes through history as a testament to American ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of victory. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.